of 13 ABC Action News. Now, your table is ready. Join 13 ABC's Jeff Smith with the decision makers of Northwest Ohio and Southeast Michigan. This is the Roundtable.
And hi there, a good Sunday afternoon to you. Thank you so much for spending some time with us here on the Roundtable program. I start with a question for you this week. Did you talk politics at all this week? It's a question that probably has a yes answer to it. Better yet, did you talk politics with somebody who agreed with you? Coming off of Super Tuesday, obviously, I'm betting you've had at least one discussion having to do with politics. And you know, I have noticed, and you've probably noticed the same thing. People tend to take politics very seriously, putting a lot of commitment and devotion into it, almost as if it's like their devotion to a sports team. So I bet you haven't had too many talks like this in the workplace, right? Because a lot of times our bosses, our supervisors, they frown upon it. They're not happy with it happening in the workplace, even scolding us when we do it. So why has that become the case? Why is that the situation in our culture right now? Why is it so taboo? It seems in this age of business building and team building within a business, it seems politics is that one factor that really breaks down all the work or progress that you've made. So the question today, when we go back to Super Tuesday, has our election process become too destructive? I want to introduce our guest to you this afternoon. He is joining us via Skype from the University of Michigan, just up US 23. I want to introduce Dr. Jeffrey Sanchez-Burks joining us right now. Thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Thank you for having me on.
I went through my discussion a little bit, and you are an associate professor of management and organizations at the Ross School of Business, and you've studied some of those cultural differences and similarities when it comes to business negotiations, collaboration, creativity, even disputes. So where does politics fall into all of this?
I think you used the right word, taboo. In the work that we've done around the world, people are much better at blending their personal and their professional lives. So, for example, politics is not a taboo topic, nor is talking about one's personal life in the workplace. But in the U.S., we tend to have a legacy, a tradition, and a norm to prefer people separate those two things. And the research shows that people are actually more successful to the extent they conform to this separation of work and personal, even if they themselves don't like that.
So in the business dynamic, when I brought up the fact of you've got all this team building that happens so much anymore, and is politics that one factor that breaks it down?
I think so. In some ways, within the way in which teams operate so effectively in our culture is that we're able to put aside the personal aspects of ourselves and focus almost exclusively on the task. And this ability to disregard how people feel about personal issues like politics actually allows us to be better than many other cultures in focusing on the task at hand. The double-edged sword is, of course, it forces us to separate things which are important to us in other contexts.
Let's look more at, as we have grown older, and obviously we spent less time focused on politics the younger we were. Now as we get older, we start to, I guess, kind of hone in to some of these intricacies that we pick up on. So as we see each presidency, you go back to Reagan, to President Clinton, to President Bush, to President Obama now, is it getting worse or has it always been there?
Well, in some ways, I guess the way to answer that question is to look at what people across the political spectrum are saying. And there seems to be some sentiment, this wisdom of the crowd, that this is particularly negative. The problem is we often have a short memory for how negative things have been in the past. So a more systematic analysis of how it is now versus how it's been in elections past would be needed. But the tone does appear to be quite negative given what everybody is saying across the political spectrum.
And when you look at that negativity, is it one of those things, I brought up the parallel between the importance we put on sports, on athletics, and we almost look at this as another competition by where we choose our side and darn you for not agreeing with the team that I'm pushing for.
Actually, your analogy again seems right on. When I travel around, one of the things people point out is how politics for Americans is often like a sport. Not just because we take it so personally, but we invest as much money in politics as we do sports.
Do you think it's become too destructive, the political process as it is today?
I think healthy debate makes sense. It does appear to be the crux of how good decisions are made. People have also argued that's one of the cornerstones of democracy. To what extent it becomes too negative often depends on where the negativity is directed. That said, it does appear that you can have very constructive, heated debates without it becoming too personal. And I think what people are often reacting to now is the sense that it's becoming too unnecessarily personal. It's not so much about the issues as it is about evoking the emotions that might sort of cause some flames in some people.
Dr. Jeffrey Sanchez-Burks, Associate Professor of Management and Organizations at the Ross School of Business, joining us via Skype today from the University of Michigan. You have traveled the world, Dr. Sanchez-Burks, and what is the sentiment when you talked about other countries deeming this almost like an athletic competition here in the U.S. when we talk about politics and the presidential races? Is it a joke among those who are outside the U.S.?
I don't think so, and that's probably driven in part by our influence.
I was going to say, we put a lot of importance on democracy, obviously.
Yes, and we still maintain a lot of influence on the world, and so for them, they don't see it so much as a joke because the outcome matters for them. They do see it more as a puzzling aspect of our culture.
Talk to me a little bit about the social dynamic and not only the workplace, but you go out to dinner with friends and all of a sudden politics is brought up and the mood changes, the conversation gets lower in tone or sometimes it gets higher in tone depending on who's bringing up the topic. But once again, another dynamic where politics really changes the atmosphere.
One of the interesting things we found that's pretty unique to American culture is Americans' ability to separate conflict that is personal versus conflict that is about a particular issue. And so people will often predict that a team that hates each other, for example, can still be successful if they have the right set of skills. And it's interesting, this discussion, because it almost suggests as if politics is one of those areas where it may be more difficult to put this aside, to literally work across boundaries, political boundaries. We don't have actually any specific research to address that, but this idea that Americans more than others can put aside interpersonal relational dynamics and conflicts while working seems to be one of the keys to their success, or to our success at working.
Is there a business model that would maybe form our political process a little better as we move forward? Obviously, we're talking only, so many months left as far as this election season is concerned. But as we move forward, 2016, 2020, so on and so forth, is there a business model, obviously in your field of study, that would help this out more?
I think it's not a matter of whether allowing political discussions to occur in the workplace is good or bad. I think as long as it fits within the broader cultural workways, then it makes sense. In other cultures where there is a blending of the personal and the professional, political talk, even though it's very heated, is not as destructive. To the extent that we allow just this one facet to permeate or to cross this work-non-work boundary could be problematic just because it goes against the grain of how we typically approach business, how we typically approach interpersonal relationships in our work life versus our personal life.
And I don't think either side of the party aisle is, I guess, innocent in this, but do you see these, as much as these candidates say they don't like this type of hate mongering and so on and so forth, do you think they are just feeding into this type of, I guess, the way they characterize the party or characterize their policies?
I think as sort of just a casual observer and participant in sort of the system, it does appear that there are fewer people involved in the process, given all this discussion of super PACs and so forth. And so the crowd, the wisdom of the crowd, of the American people that is typically involved in all aspects seems to be diminished, or that wisdom doesn't seem to have as much of an influence, at least at this part of the process, because so many fewer people are running things, are making decisions about advertisements and so forth.
And that brings me to another question. Part of your study field is on collaboration in the workplace, and I would think collaboration, you hear that word, you think immediately the anti-collaboration that is happening in Congress. So what is the solution there?
Well, from a business perspective, the lack of collaboration in the political system is a lesson about the benefits of separating politics from business. If we want to get things done in an organization, we definitely don't want people to be resistant to collaborating for fear of being perceived as a collaborator or somebody who compromises. In all collaborations, in all work teams, in all productive innovation teams, this idea of not compromise, but collaboration in the sense that figuring out what priorities I can give you everything on, what can you give me everything on, and rather than even just trying to split the difference, that's critical to success. That's critical because people come to the table with different perspectives, with different priorities. If you only look where there's a perfect match in priorities and perspectives, it's just not going to happen very often.
For the remainder of this election season, Doctor, what do you see as, I guess, the keys to success for not only the voting public and making the wise choice that they need to based on what they need to make that choice on, but also the candidates themselves and kind of putting the best foot forward?
Well, I don't think I have the keys to success for either political party or for even the process. I think the only key that I can see that we can draw from lessons of what we know about effective collaboration is to increase the participation. The number of people that are involved in the process tends to provide a better process.
And you bring up a great point right there. We just saw here in Ohio this past week, Super Tuesday voting, it was just under a quarter, 1 in 4 people went to the polls for this primary. And obviously, it's a Republican presidential primary and the school levies and whatnot on the ballot. But it's the problem with involvement in the process, is it not?
Yes, I mean, for example, in Australia, it's compulsory to vote. And in other countries, there's fines if you don't vote. The idea there is giving a strong incentive for people to vote would be good. Whether that would work here, I don't know. But the more people involved, the better. And, you know, the statistic you point out, the statistic's even worse if you look at the number of people involved at putting together commercials, funding campaigns, where the amount of influence is being sort of originated from a very small handful of people. So participation is key. How to increase the participation is, of course, what each political party tries to do. But when they do that, things work out better for the country as a whole, I believe.
Dr. Sanchez-Burks, we put up a poll on our Facebook page earlier this week asking people if they tended to bring up politics at work, if they did because they wanted to change ideas of the other person, and if they voted no, it was because they didn't like confrontation. It ended up being a 60-30 split on those who didn't bring it up. Is your advice to folks this week or in the following weeks that just keep it to yourself?
Well, I think people should do what they want, first and foremost, but knowing the consequences. I mean, that poll is completely consistent with our research. We find that people, even if they want to bring up something personal, say their political ideas, they know that the most organizations discourage this. And if they're concerned about fitting in and moving up in the organization, they may be hesitant to do so. But just because that's the current norm doesn't mean that the norm should not be changed. That's really a personal decision, and collectively we can change who we are as a culture. But being aware of those dynamics, I think, is kind of wise for the individual to have in their mind.
Dr. Jeffrey Sanchez-Burks, Associate Professor of Management and Organizations at the Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan. We so appreciate you taking some time out of your busy schedule to join us here on the Roundtable.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Stay right there. When we come back, we will continue here on the Roundtable program, talk about a unique opportunity here in the city of Toledo to see something, well, maybe you've never seen before. Stay with us.